Ada had always loved eating out. To her, the variety of meals, the convenience, and the chance to explore new restaurants outweighed the inconvenience of cooking at home. That evening, after a long day at work, she found herself in a sleek new restaurant she had recently discovered. The place had captivated her with its beautiful decor and ever-bustling crowd. After finishing a plate of her favorite meal, Ada felt her stomach churn not out of sickness, but from the urgent need to visit the restroom. Leaving her empty plate behind, she got up and asked a nearby waitress where the restroom was. The waitress, smiling politely, pointed her toward a narrow hallway. However, upon reaching the restroom, Ada quickly realized it was occupied. She knocked a few times but got no response other than muffled noises from within. Her stomach twisted tighter. She couldn't wait much longer and looked around, desperate for an alternative solution. Ada's eyes drifted across the bustling restaurant, eventually landing on a door swinging slightly open. A small worn-out sign above the doorway read, "Kitchen," in faded letters. For a moment, her thoughts wrestled. Should I take a look? The idea crept into her mind gently at first, but then she forcefully pushed it aside. No, don't be ridiculous, Ada. Just wait for the restroom. She shifted uncomfortably, her stomach tightening yet again. Her gaze, however, remained glued to the swinging door. She started hearing faint sounds, clattering dishes and muffled voices from the kitchen. The sound was more chaotic than she imagined a kitchen in such a prestigious and exotic restaurant would have. Stop staring, she scolded herself silently. Maybe it's better not to know. Just as she took a step back, a startling movement caught her attention. Two rats, thin, gray, and bold, ran out of a small hole near a box on the ground. They squeaked noisily as they chased each other in circles before disappearing back into the kitchen through the partially open door. Ada recoiled, her brows furrowing in disbelief. Rats? Here. That food, the food I just ate. The thought stopped her cold as her mind filled with images she didn't want to entertain. Questions pelted her like raindrops. Was my meal really prepared in that kitchen? Could it be as bad as I'm imagining? How could this restaurant so beautiful and stylish possibly have rats? The rational voice in her head advised her to leave it alone. Don't ruin your evening with unnecessary drama, Ada. Just wait for the restroom, finish up, and go home. But her curiosity bloomed like wildfire, fed by thoughts she couldn't suppress. What if there was something truly wrong? What if it was more than just rats? Before she could stop herself, Ada stepped closer to the kitchen door, her heart beating fast as she carefully pushed it open with her fingertips. It swung inward without resistance, revealing the scene on the other side. What she saw made her stomach churn violently. It stopped her in her tracks and nearly made her vomit, her mouth falling slightly open in shock. It was worse than anything she had prepared herself for. Her desire for the restroom was momentarily overtaken by her horror. The kitchen, if one could even call it that, was a nightmare. A rotten pit of death and mess. The odor emanating from it was like that of rotting excrement. Piles of dirty dishes leaned precariously on both sides of the sink, some with food remnants so old they had hardened into an unrecognizable brown crust, with green, mucus-like mold that had been growing undisturbed for weeks. Ada's eyes scanned the room as if in slow motion. Everything she saw was worse than the last. The kitchen cabinets, where food was supposed to be prepared, were packed with unwashed cutting boards and knives caked in residue and vomit, exposed to houseflies. Their continuous buzzing added to the soundtrack of chaos. Then Ada saw the kitchen staff, and her dread sank deeper. The women working inside looked unkempt, their hair messy with visible dandruff, tied back with dirty hairbands. Their faces were covered with sweat, their aprons, once white, she assumed, were now stained beyond belief with smears of sauce, grease, and unidentifiable blotches that looked like they hadn't been washed in years. It was then her eyes landed on what could only be the head cook. The woman was a fat, middle-aged figure with deep wrinkles etched into her face. She stirred a boiling pot of soup, unconcerned about the sweat dripping down her neck or the stain-covered sleeveless gown she wore. But it was what she did next that made Ada's jaw drop. The cook paused for a moment, then absent-mindedly scratched her unshaved, sweaty armpit, with the very spoon she had been using to stir the soup. Before Ada could even react, the woman slipped the spoon back into the pot and continued stirring like nothing had happened. A wave of disgust rolled over Ada. She clamped a hand over her mouth to prevent herself from vomiting. The oozing stench of the room, a mix of rotten food, sweat, and wet rags, didn't help. Rats ran freely between boxes piled across the filthy floor. Ada could hardly believe this was the same place serving such delicious meals to customers. Her brain screamed at her to look away, to walk back into the dining area and pretend she hadn't seen any of this, but her feet were glued to the spot, as if the scene was too ugly to turn away from. She only snapped out of her trance when she stepped on something soft and wet beneath her shoe. Looking down, she realized she had stepped on lettuce meant for salad floating lazily in a pool of filthy water. That was her breaking point. Heart pounding, she stumbled back into the dining area, trying her best to look normal. Clutching her stomach with one hand and covering her mouth with the other, Ada fled toward her table. She grabbed her bag and moved quickly toward the exit, ignoring the smiles of the waiters as she passed by. It wasn't until she had made it outside, where the cool evening breeze kissed her sweaty skin, that she finally lost control. Bending over the gutter by the side of the road, Ada emptied the contents of her stomach, vomiting violently. The meal she had just enjoyed minutes ago came pouring out as her mind replayed the horrors she had just witnessed. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she struggled to catch her breath. The memory of the sweating cook and that filthy spoon wouldn't leave her, no matter how hard she tried to shove it away. As she wiped her mouth and stood upright again, a wave of regret and anger washed over her. How could I, someone who thinks she's paying for quality food, have been so blind? She had trusted the illusion, polished tables, beautiful decor, an impressive wine list, without questioning what went on behind the scenes. And now she knew the truth. Ada wrapped her arms around herself as she began walking home, her steps slow and heavy. The irony was suffocating. The very convenience she treasured, the comfort of eating out, had betrayed her in the worst way. She thought back to every meal she had eaten there, and at countless other restaurants before this. She shuddered. Ada had always been a fan of eating out, but perhaps this experience was the wake-up call she needed. She reflected on her lifestyle as she walked home. Her addiction to restaurants and food vendors wasn't something she had developed on her own. It was a habit learned growing up. As the eldest of 3 children, Ada had taken on the role of caretaker at a young age, yet cooking never became part of her routine. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Obi, were always consumed by work. Her father was a truck driver, often gone for months at a time, while her mother owned a busy shop in the heart of the market. Their lifestyle left her and her siblings, Emeka and Ifeananya, to fend for themselves. She vividly remembered the day their life of eating out began. With her parents always busy, Ada and her siblings would wake up to an empty kitchen, scavenging for stale bread and leftovers. Her mother, though loving, would always rush out to attend to customers who called before dawn. In the evenings, she would buy takeaway food, which initially excited them, but soon became repetitive. Ada, the eldest, understood why her parents worked hard, but she yearned for homemade meals. One Saturday morning, she decided to take matters into her own hands and cook rice for her siblings. However, her inexperience led to burnt rice, filling the kitchen with a sharp, acrid smell. Her siblings were disappointed, and Ada felt guilty for failing them. Despite multiple attempts, her cooking endeavors ended in disaster, killing both her confidence and her siblings' faith in her abilities. After they complained to their mother about always being hungry when she wasn't around, their mother started giving them money for meals. This often meant buying junk food and snacks. Eventually, tired of snacks, they decided to take matters into their own hands and search the streets for affordable, delicious food. "Let's go find something good to eat," Ada had said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Yay! Emika and Ifyananya chimed in unison. They wandered through the bustling streets, passing vendors selling roasted corn, fried plantains, and steaming bowls of soup. But the money they had wasn't enough for soup and swallow. Their stomachs growled in response. Then they saw him, an Aboki man selling suya, his grill sizzling with juicy meat. The aroma of spices and charred meat wafted through the air. Suya! Emika exclaimed, tugging on Ada's hand. They approached the vendor. How much? Ada asked. 100 naira per stick, the man replied. Ada handed over their money and received 2 sticks of suya. But the moment they tasted the meat, they knew something was wrong. The texture was slimy, the flavor sour. This tastes funny, Ifyananya said, her face contorting. Is it spoiled? Emika asked. Ada's heart sank. They couldn't return it. The vendor looked fierce, and they couldn't afford to waste the money. Just eat it, Ada said firmly. We can't waste the money. Reluctantly, her siblings obeyed. Ada tried to hide her own disgust as she chewed. Inside, she felt guilt twist her insides. She was forcing her siblings to eat spoiled food, trapped by circumstances. But she vowed to find a better way. By the time she left for university, cooking was still a foreign concept. She had spent her entire life relying on food vendors. Every kobo she had went to food. Then came her NYSC posting, and her roommate, Titi. Titi, bubbly and passionate about cooking, was a breath of fresh air. While Ada ordered takeout, Titi whipped up delicious meals from scratch. You should learn how to cook, Titi would say. It's cheaper, safer, and healthier. Ada would smile and nod, but deep inside, she was skeptical. She loved the freedom of the street food scene. Still, she began to wonder, maybe it was time to learn. Over the following weeks, Zainab couldn't shake the memory of that night. The image of the rat-infested kitchen and the cook's sweat-slicked spoon haunted her dreams. Every time she passed a street vendor or walked by a restaurant, her stomach knotted with unease. Her once beloved routine of exploring new eateries had crumbled. She stopped ordering food, no longer trusting even the most high-end restaurants. Jane noticed. You haven't touched your food, Jane said one evening, raising an eyebrow as she plated a steaming pot of egusi soup with pounded yam. Zainab shrugged, her appetite lost. I'm just not hungry. Jane sat beside her, concern in her eyes. It's about that place, isn't it? Zainab didn't answer at first, but her silence said everything. She stared blankly at the wall, remembering the buzzing flies and sour stench. Jane placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Look, that was disgusting, yes. But not every restaurant is like that. Still, you've got to eat, Z. You can't starve yourself because of one bad experience. Zainab looked down at her hands. It wasn't just that place, Jane. That night made me realize I've been running from something my whole life. I never learned how to cook because it was easier not to. I relied on others, vendors, restaurants, anyone but myself. I was too scared of failing again. Jane smiled softly. Then start small. Cooking isn't some magical skill, it's learned. And I'll teach you. Zainab chuckled under her breath, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. You're serious? Of course. Tomorrow, we start with jollof rice. No excuses. And true to her word, the next day, Jane laid out ingredients on the kitchen counter like a proud teacher ready to educate. Tomatoes, onions, pepper, oil, seasoning cubes, rice, it all looked so simple, yet Zainab felt like she was about to defuse a bomb. Jane noticed the panic in her eyes. Relax. You're not cooking for the president. It's just you and me. The first attempt was clumsy. Zainab overblended the pepper, nearly forgot the salt, and stirred the rice too often. But when they finally dished the steaming pot of orange rice, the aroma filled the room, and pride filled her chest. She took a bite. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. Tears welled in her eyes, and Jane reached over to hug her. "You did it, Z." That night, Zainab slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. From then on, the kitchen became her haven. She started experimenting with stews, beans, even umla and yudu, dishes she once paid top naira for. With each new recipe, her confidence grew. She began documenting her journey, posting photos on Instagram with honest captions about her culinary failures and small victories. Slowly, her followers grew, other young people inspired by her transformation. Months later, Zainab stood in her kitchen, apron stained, laughter echoing as she hosted a small dinner for friends. Jane beamed proudly from the corner, sipping